There's a special kind of satisfaction that comes from watching someone who tried to destroy you get exactly what they deserve. This is the story of how my boss tried to ruin my career, break the law while doing it, and how I made absolutely sure he never worked in our industry again. And the best part? I did it all by the book. My name's irrelevant, but for the sake of this story, let's call me Alex. I worked in corporate procurement for a mid-sized manufacturing company. Not glamorous, but stable. Good benefits, decent pay, normal 9 to 5 hours. I'd been there for 6 years, worked my way up from junior buyer to senior procurement specialist. I was good at my job. Really good. I negotiated contracts that saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. I built relationships with vendors. I streamlined processes. My performance reviews were always excellent. I had no reason to think my job was in danger. Then, we got a new boss. His name was Derek Mitchell. He was hired as the director of operations about 8 months ago, brought in from outside the company by the new VP who wanted to shake things up and bring in fresh perspectives. Derek was in his mid-40s, MBA from some middling business school, loved using buzzwords like synergy and optimizing workflows and leveraging core competencies. He wore expensive suits and talked constantly about his previous job at a Fortune 500 company, which apparently made him an expert on everything. From day one, Derek and I did not get along. It wasn't personal at first, it was professional. He'd come into meetings with ideas that made no sense from a procurement standpoint, and I'd push back with data and logic. He didn't like that. He was the kind of manager who wanted yes men, not people who challenged him. But I wasn't going to nod along to bad ideas just to stroke his ego. That's not how you run a department. The first real conflict happened about 2 months after he started. Derek wanted to switch one of our key suppliers to a new vendor he'd worked with at his old company. He said they were more reliable and offered better value. I ran the numbers. They didn't. The new vendor was more expensive, had longer lead times, and their quality metrics were worse. I put together a report showing all of this and presented it in a meeting. Derek's face turned red. He said, "I don't think you understand the bigger picture here." I said, "I understand that switching to this vendor would cost us an extra $200,000 a year and delay production timelines. That's the picture." He didn't like that. The meeting ended awkwardly. A week later, he pulled me into his office and said, "I need you to be a team player, Alex. When I make a decision, I need you to support it, not undermine me in front of the team." I said, "With all due respect, my job is to make sure we're making sound procurement decisions. If I see a problem, I'm going to say something." He stared at me for a long moment and then said, "Just be careful. I'd hate to see your attitude become a performance issue." That's when I knew he was going to try to get rid of me, but I didn't think he'd be stupid enough to do it illegally. Over the next few months, Derek started building a case against me. Little things at first. He'd send me emails with vague instructions, and then when I followed them, he'd claim I'd misunderstood and write me up for failing to follow directions. He started excluding me from meetings I'd always been part of, and then he'd criticize me for not being in the loop. He'd assign me projects with impossible deadlines, and then document that I failed to deliver on time. It was textbook constructive dismissal. He was creating a paper trail to justify firing me. But here's the thing. I'm not an idiot. I saw what he was doing. So I started documenting everything. Every email, every meeting, every conversation. I kept a detailed log with dates, times, and summaries of what was said. I backed up every file to my personal cloud storage. I saved every performance review, every piece of positive feedback from colleagues and vendors, every email where someone thanked me for my work. I was building my own paper trail. The breaking point came about 5 months after Derek started. We were in the middle of a major contract negotiation with one of our biggest suppliers. It was a multi-million-dollar deal, and I'd been working on it for months. I'd gotten them down to terms that were extremely favorable for us. Better pricing, better payment terms, better quality guarantees. It was a huge win. I sent Derek an email with the final terms and asked for his approval to close the deal. He didn't respond for 3 days. Then he called me into his office on a Friday afternoon. He had another manager with him, Linda from HR. That's never a good sign. He said, "Alex, we need to talk about your performance." I said, "Okay." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a performance improvement plan, a PIP. If you've ever worked in corporate America, you know what that means. It's the step before they fire you. The PIP listed a bunch of vague complaints. Failure to communicate effectively. Inability to work collaboratively with management. Missed deadlines on key projects. None of it was specific. None of it was true. I looked at Linda. She wouldn't make eye contact. I looked at Derek. He had this smug little smile on his face. He said, "You'll have 30 days to improve in these areas. We'll have weekly check-ins to assess your progress. If you don't meet expectations, we'll have to let you go." I said, "Can I ask what specific incidents you're referring to?" He said, "It's all in the document." I said, "No, it's not. This is all subjective. Can you give me concrete examples?" He said, "I don't need to explain myself to you, Alex. This is your warning. Take it seriously." I took the document, stood up, and walked out. I went straight to my car, sat in the parking lot, and called an employment lawyer. I'd been researching this for weeks, ever since I realized Derek was trying to push me out. The lawyer's name was Jennifer Carr, and she specialized in wrongful termination and workplace retaliation. I explained the situation. She said, "Do you have documentation?" I said, "I have everything." She said, "Good. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. And start looking for a new job, because they're going to fire you no matter what you do." That was hard to hear, but I knew she was right. So I did two things. First, I started applying for jobs. Second, I started preparing for war. The next week, Derek called me into his office for our first check-in. He spent 20 minutes criticizing everything I'd done that week. I'd sent an email to a vendor that he said was too casual. I'd attended a meeting where I didn't contribute enough. I'd submitted a report that was lacking in detail. It was all bullshit, and we both knew it. At the end of the meeting, he said, "I'm not seeing improvement, Alex. You need to step it up." I said, "Can you give me specific metrics? What does improvement look like?" He said, "You should know what good work looks like. I shouldn't have to spell it out for you." I said, "I'd like to document what your expectations are so I can meet them." He said, "This isn't a negotiation." After that meeting, I sent an email to both Derek and Linda summarizing the conversation and asking for written clarification on the performance standards I was expected to meet. I copied myself on it. No response. A week later, another check-in. Same thing. More vague complaints. No specifics. No measurable goals. I sent another follow-up email. No response. 3 weeks into the PIP, Derek called me into his office again. This time, Linda wasn't there. He said, "This isn't working out, Alex. I'm terminating your employment, effective immediately." I said, "On what grounds?" He said, "Failure to meet the standards outlined in your performance improvement plan." I said, "You never outlined any standards. I asked multiple times for clarification, and you refused." He said, "That's not my problem. You're done. Turn in your badge and your laptop." I said, "Am I being given severance?" He said, "No. You were terminated for performance. You're not entitled to severance." I said, "I'd like to speak to HR." He said, "Linda's not available. You need to leave now." Here's where Derek made his first major mistake. In our state, if you fire someone for performance reasons, you have to have documented evidence of poor performance, and you have to have given them a reasonable opportunity to improve. Derek had neither. He had a vague PIP with no measurable goals, and he'd refused to provide clarification when I asked for it. That's wrongful termination. Strike one. His second mistake? He had me escorted out of the building by security in front of my entire team. Humiliating, right? But also stupid, because that's evidence of retaliation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Strike two. His third mistake? He told several of my coworkers that I'd been fired for stealing company property and violating company policy. That's defamation. And I had witnesses. Strike three. I went home, called Jennifer, and told her what happened. She said, "Did you sign anything?" I said, "No." She said, "Good. We're going to bury him." The first step was filing a wrongful termination claim with the state labor board. Jennifer helped me put together a complaint that was 50 pages long, with exhibits, emails, meeting notes, performance reviews, my documentation log, everything. We filed it 2 weeks after I was fired. The second step was filing a formal complaint with the company's executive team. I sent a detailed letter to the CEO, the VP of HR, and the general counsel outlining everything Derek had done, including the defamation, the lack of due process, and the retaliation. I attached evidence. I made it clear that I was pursuing legal action and that Derek had exposed the company to significant liability. The third step was reaching out to some of my contacts in the industry. I'd been in procurement for over 10 years. I knew people. I knew vendors. I knew competitors. I knew recruiters. And I let them know, very carefully and very professionally, that Derek Mitchell was not someone they wanted to work with. I didn't lie. I didn't exaggerate. I just told them the truth, that he'd terminated me without cause, that he'd lied about my performance, and that he'd created a hostile work environment. Word spreads fast in our industry. Within a month, the company's legal team reached out to Jennifer. They wanted to settle. They offered me 6 months severance, a neutral reference, and a non-disclosure agreement. Jennifer laughed and said no. She said, "Your client fired my client illegally, defamed him, and exposed you to a lawsuit that you will lose. 6 months severance is insulting." They came back with a better offer. 12 months severance, full benefits continuation, a glowing reference letter, and a public statement that I'd been terminated without cause, and they wanted Derek to issue a written apology. Jennifer said, "We're getting closer, but we're not there yet." Here's the thing about corporate lawyers. They're not stupid. They knew Derek had screwed up. They knew I had evidence. They knew that if this went to court, I'd win, and the company would not only have to pay me damages, but they'd also take a reputational hit. So they were motivated to settle. But I wasn't just motivated by money. I wanted Derek gone. Jennifer told them, "Here are our terms. 18 months severance, full benefits for that period." A reference letter signed by the CEO stating that Alex was a valued employee who was terminated without cause due to management error. A public acknowledgement sent to all employees that the termination was improper. And Derek Mitchell's immediate termination. They balked at the last part. They said Derek was a senior manager, and they couldn't just fire him without cause. Jennifer said, "You absolutely can. He created liability for your company. He defamed an employee. He violated your own HR policies. If you don't fire him, we're going to court, and I'm going to make sure every detail of his misconduct becomes part of the public record." It took another 2 weeks of negotiation, but they caved. I got everything I asked for. 18 months severance, full benefits, a glowing reference from the CEO, a company-wide email acknowledging that my termination was improper and that the company was taking steps to ensure this doesn't happen again. And Derek Mitchell was fired. But I wasn't done. Remember how I said I'd reached out to contacts in the industry? Well, Derek tried to get a new job. He applied to several companies over the next few months. And every single time, he didn't get the job. Why? Because people called me. Recruiters, hiring managers, industry colleagues. They'd say, "Hey, we're looking at Derek Mitchell for a position. You worked with him, right? What can you tell me?" And I'd tell them the truth. I'd say, "Derek created a hostile work environment at my previous company. He terminated me without cause and exposed the company to legal liability. He was fired for misconduct. I wouldn't recommend him." That's not illegal. That's not defamation. That's just honesty. And in our industry, reputation matters. Derek couldn't get a job. Not at any reputable company. About 6 months after I was fired, and 3 months after Derek was fired, I ran into him at an industry conference. I was there networking, talking to vendors, meeting with potential employers. I'd already landed a new job by that point, actually. A better one, with a 20% pay increase and a title bump. I was doing great. Derek was there too, apparently trying to network his way into a new position. We made eye contact across the room. He looked awful, tired, defeated. He walked over to me. I thought he was going to yell at me or make a scene, but he didn't. He just said, "You ruined my career." I looked at him for a long moment, Then I said, "No. You ruined your career. I just made sure everyone knew about it." He stared at me, and I could see it in his eyes. He finally understood. He'd thought he could bully me, lie about me, push me out, and face no consequences. He'd thought he was untouchable, but he wasn't. And now he was paying the price. I walked away. I didn't gloat. I didn't rub it in. I just walked away. Because I didn't need to say anything else. The results spoke for themselves. Here's the aftermath. Derek never worked in our industry again. Last I heard, he'd moved to a different state and taken a job in a completely unrelated field. His LinkedIn profile doesn't mention his time at my old company anymore. It's like he's trying to erase it. As for me, I'm thriving. The new job is great. My boss actually listens to me and values my expertise. I've been promoted once already. I rebuilt my reputation, and if anything, the whole situation made me more respected in the industry. People know I'm someone who won't be pushed around, and that I'll stand up for what's right. But here's the real lesson. Derek didn't lose because I was smarter than him. He lost because he broke the rules. He thought he could fire me illegally, defame me, and get away with it because he was in a position of power. But power without accountability is just arrogance. And arrogance always catches up with you. I didn't ruin Derek's career out of spite. I ruined it because he deserved it. There's a difference. Spite is petty. Spite is emotional. What I did was strategic, methodical, and entirely justified. He tried to destroy me for no reason other than ego. He lied. He manipulated. He abused his power. And when you do that, you don't get to walk away without consequences. But let me tell you about the update that made this whole thing even more satisfying. About 8 months after Derek was fired, I got a LinkedIn message from someone I didn't know. Her name was Rachel, and she said she'd worked with Derek at his previous company, the Fortune 500 one he'd always bragged about. She said, "I heard what happened with Derek at your company. I just wanted to reach out and say thank you. He did the same thing to me 3 years ago, and I didn't have the resources to fight back. I'm glad someone finally held him accountable." I messaged her back and asked her to tell me more. We ended up having a phone call that lasted over an hour. Rachel's story was almost identical to mine. Derek had targeted her, created a fake paper trail, fired her without cause, and then lied about why she was terminated. She'd tried to fight it, but the company had buried her complaint and forced her to sign an NDA as part of a minimal severance package. She'd been so traumatized by the experience that she'd left the industry entirely and retrained in a different field. She said, "I've thought about him every day for 3 years, wondering if he was doing it to other people, wondering if he'd ever face consequences. And then I heard through the grapevine what happened at your company, and I can't tell you how much it means to know that someone finally stopped him." That conversation changed everything for me, because up until that point, I'd thought this was just about me and Derek, a personal conflict between two people. But it wasn't. Derek was a serial bully. He had a pattern of behavior. He'd done this before, and if I hadn't stopped him, he would have kept doing it. Who knows how many other people he would have destroyed? I asked Rachel if she'd be willing to talk to my lawyer. She said yes. Jennifer reached back out to my old company's legal team and said, "We have another former employee who's willing to testify about a pattern of misconduct by Derek Mitchell. You might want to revisit your settlement terms." The company panicked. They didn't want this to become a class action situation. They offered me an additional settlement, another 6 months of severance, in exchange for agreeing not to pursue further claims. I took it. That brought my total severance package to 2 years of pay, plus benefits, plus the reference letter, plus the public acknowledgement. But more importantly, Rachel felt heard. She'd been carrying that trauma for years, thinking she was the only one, thinking she'd somehow deserved it. Knowing that Derek had been held accountable, that his behavior had finally caught up with him, gave her closure. She told me, "I feel like I can finally move on now." That meant more to me than any settlement check. There's one more update. About a year after all of this went down, I got an email from Linda, the HR manager who'd sat in on that meeting where Derek put me on the PIP. the one who wouldn't make eye contact. She said, "I know I probably can't undo the damage, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I knew what Derek was doing was wrong, and I should have pushed back harder. I was afraid of losing my job, and I let that fear make me complicit. I've since left the company, and I'm working somewhere with better leadership. I just wanted you to know that I think about what happened all the time, and I'm working on being braver." I wrote her back. I said, "Thank you for reaching out. I appreciate the apology. What Derek did wasn't your fault, but you're right that you could have done more. The good news is you learned from it. That's all any of us can do." She replied and said it meant a lot to hear that. We're not friends or anything, but I respect that she had the guts to own her part in it. So here's where I am now, 2 years after Derek tried to ruin my life. I'm in a job I love, working for a boss who respects me. I've rebuilt my reputation to the point where I'm actually getting approached by recruiters regularly. I've got financial security, thanks to the settlement. And I've got the satisfaction of knowing that Derek Mitchell will never be able to do to anyone else what he tried to do to me. People ask me sometimes if I feel bad about what happened to him, if I think I went too far. And my answer is always the same. No, I don't feel bad. Not even a little bit. Because here's the thing. I didn't lie about him. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't make anything up. I just told the truth. The truth about what he did. The truth about how he treated people. The truth about the kind of leader he was. If the truth destroyed his career, that's on him, not me. And here's the bigger lesson. Standing up to a bully is not the same as being a bully. Holding someone accountable is not the same as seeking revenge. I didn't go after Derek because I wanted to hurt him. I went after him because he hurt me, and because I knew that if I didn't stop him, he'd hurt someone else. That's not revenge. That's justice. There's a quote I love. "The axe forgets, but the tree remembers." Derek probably doesn't think about me anymore. He's moved on with his life, trying to rebuild in some other industry, pretending the whole thing never happened. But I remember. Rachel remembers. Every person he ever bullied remembers. And because we remember, we made sure he couldn't do it again. So here's my advice if you ever find yourself in a situation like this. Document everything. Every email, every conversation, every meeting. Build your case before you need it. Don't rely on your company to protect you. Protect yourself. And if someone tries to destroy you, don't just roll over and take it. Fight back. Legally, strategically, and without mercy. Because bullies only stop when they face consequences. And one more thing. Don't ever let anyone make you feel guilty for standing up for yourself. People will say you're being vindictive, or that you should have just moved on, or that you're making too big a deal out of it. Ignore them. Those people have never been in your position. They don't know what it's like to have someone systematically try to ruin your life. You don't owe them an explanation, and you don't owe your abuser forgiveness. Derek tried to break me. He tried to take away my livelihood, my reputation, and my dignity. And instead, I took away his career. Some people will say, that makes me just as bad as him. But those people are wrong. There's a difference between destroying someone for your own ego and destroying someone because they left you no other choice. I didn't want to go to war with Derek. He forced me into it. And when someone forces you into a fight, you don't fight fair. You fight to win. So here's my question for you. If your boss tried to illegally fire you and ruin your reputation, would you fight back the way I did? Or would you take the high road, let it go, and just try to move on? Drop your verdict, NTA, YTA, ESH, or NAH, and be honest. Because I know some of you are going to say, I went too far. That I should have just taken the settlement and walked away. That I shouldn't have burned his career to the ground. But I want you to really think about it. If someone tried to destroy you, and you had the power to make sure they could never do it to anyone else, wouldn't you use it? I would. I did. And I'd do it again. Thanks for listening. Next episode, we're diving into something completely different. A story about family boundaries, and a mother-in-law who learned the hard way that some lines you just don't cross. But until then, remember this. Document everything. Trust your gut, and never let anyone make you feel small. Because the people who try to destroy you are counting on you to stay quiet. And the moment you refuse to stay quiet, they lose all their power. Derek learned that lesson the hard way, and I slept like a baby every single night after I made sure he'd never forget it.